Hey everyone, Sean Frangella here with a new tutorial about how to get started with building custom textures and materials in Cinema 4D Lite in After Effects CC 2015 or in the full version of Cinema 4D. So if you're completely new to how materials work in Cinema 4D, or if you're using R16 or above and want an understanding of how things work differently between our legacy settings and this new Reflectance tabs and the different methods you can use to build materials, this will be a great starting point for either of those areas. So in this one, we'll talk about both methods and work towards building different options like these where we're using our reflections as they used to be built with R15 and below, and then take a look at what we can do with R16 Reflectance materials. Now, this one picks up where we were in my last video where we talked about the best practices of building a 3D extruded logo in Cinema 4D or a Cinema 4D Lite. So if you want to check that one out first, be sure to check that one out. And if we're picking up from there, we had our logo and we had extruded it and built it out. And now we need to add some materials and eventually lighting and animation. So I'll just delete this base material. And what I want to talk about for this first part is creating basic materials with our legacy reflection model if you're looking for that. So what we want to do is go to create new material or double click and open that up, and that's going to create a material in our scene. And I'll just create the three materials for this logo starting with that dark blue. So what I'm going to do is go to color and click our color picker, and I'll go grab a dark blue, and this will be our first color. And so we can see what's going on with this. I'm going to drag this onto this outer main piece because I know that that's this navy color, and I'll turn on my render region with Alt R and just rename this blue. Now for this one, I'm going to go to Reflectance, and if you're looking for how the materials used to work, or if you're on R15 or below, if you go to add, there's these new reflection models. If you're looking for the old one, you can go to Reflection Legacy, and this will let you build out materials how they used to if you wanted to, or if you just need some basic materials that you need to render quicker. So I'm gonna pick Reflection Legacy, and it's gonna look like it's gonna disappear because it's completely reflective, and there's the complete absence of light here, so we wouldn't see anything. Now, if we wanna create a little more realistic effect with that blue material having reflection, we can go to Layer Mask, and under Texture, by this arrow, click Fresnel. And what this is going to do is create a more realistic look where the amount of reflectance we'd see on a surface would depend on the viewing angle. So we can see if it was a sphere, we'd see a lot more reflection on the edges. If we're looking right at it, we wouldn't see as much. And if we punch in with our camera to some of these closer little edges, we can see what's going on here and how it's reflecting. Now, if we want to adjust our specular on kind of the old way of dealing with specular highlights, we can go to Default Specular, and we can adjust the width, fall off, inner strength, and outer strength. You see that little white dot, and that's how it's going to deal with these edges and areas where we'd see a specular hit, and you can kind of see the difference that that's going to do. If we go back to our main reflectance layer, if we wanted to tone this down, we could adjust our overall reflectance layer, and we also could turn up roughness if we wanted blurry reflections, which will be a bit of a render hit, but it can be a really nice way to get a little more realistic reflections. So that at least gives us a base material. Now everything is completely smooth and there's not much texture to this. So if we want to add a little bit of visual interest without adding geometry, what we can do is add a bump to it in the bump channel. So I'll check that on. And under this texture arrow, I'll go to noise. And the default one is going to look ridiculous, as we'll see. But what we can do is dig down to this by clicking noise and adjust this to different noise looks and adjust the settings. So if we don't want this default one, we can click this drop down or click this little arrow and see the different kinds. And let's grab one of these other ones. Let's go with this Luca. That's always a good option. And we can see it now. We're going to get a little more realistic material where it doesn't look huge and create some texture on there. Now, if we want to adjust this even further, we could adjust the global scale up if we wanted it to be much bigger and just get a little bit of that, or down. Let's go to like 50%, and that's going to make it smaller. Now we can see we have some issues with projection, and this is where it's important to understand the difference between a material and a material tag. Over here on our material tag, we're dealing with how it's being projected and wrapped around our object. So we can see on the front, it probably doesn't quite wrap around how we'd want it to. So we can go to projection right here on this drop down and change this to something else. In this case, something like cubic would probably work better. And you can see it wraps that around a little better how we'd want it. Now, if we open that back up, if we wanted to take the amount of bump it's adding down a bit, we could take our strength down to maybe something like 5 or 10, and that way we're getting some roughness and texture to that without adding extra geometry and render time. Now, the nice thing about working with textures in Cinema 4D is once we build a custom texture and we've applied it with a tag, we can very easily duplicate those and swap things out. So if we want to now make an orange material, I can hold Command and drag, and that's going to duplicate my material, and I can just open this up, rename it orange, go to color, and I'll change this to an orangish reddish color as it is. And then I could drag this onto the pieces that are orange, or over here in the object manager, or if I know I want to bring over those tag settings that we adjusted, I could hold Command and drag it and duplicate the tag, and then hold Command or Control and drop it onto that old material, and it'll swap it out. And then I could hold Command and just duplicate that tag to the other parts to quickly bring those. And I could even group a couple of these, like these blue pieces, by pressing Alt-G, and it's going to put that in the null. And I could duplicate that tag onto the null, and it's going to cascade down to those pieces. And then I'll just do the same thing and create a white material, and we'll call this white, go to color, make this completely white, but we'll still get our bumpiness. And again, I could duplicate that tag, or I could drag it on here and just grab all these tags and change this all to cubic, and then we know that they're all going to match. And then if we need to adjust the settings separately, we could do that. So this white one, we might need a little less bump, so we see it more of the real white, and let the colored pieces have a bit more of that bump. Now, rather than just making the eyepiece orange, one thing we could do is make a new material for just the eye. So I'll duplicate that by holding Command, open this up, call this orange eye. And to create some little hotness on it, we could turn on a glow right here. And if I do Alt-R for my render region and put this just on our eye and drop this material on, it's going to render that and then the eye. So it by default creates this kind of halo glow, which isn't that great. But one thing we could do is take the radius down and turn the inner strength up, and then it's going to contain that more just directly on that element, so we get some nice little hotness right around that eye that'll blend on top, and we can just adjust that further. So there's a lot more to materials with our legacy settings, like normal maps, the alpha channel, transparency. But if we're just getting started with building basic materials and understanding tags, that's a good starting point. And from there, we could get into lighting. So if you like this method and you want to jump ahead to the next video, you could click that thumbnail now, where we'll start to deal with lighting and how the lights are interacting with this, because that's really going to depict what we're seeing and what it looks like. But if we want to talk about how we could use this Reflectance tab in a completely different way with the new models, we could build out similar materials to this and go even further. So let's do that. I'm just going to delete all of those materials and then just delete these question marks where it's looking for the materials. And again, I'll make a new material down here and we'll open this one up. Same thing, call this blue. And now let's build this as a layered reflectance material and see what we can do there. So I'm going to check off color, and I'll delete the default specular because we won't need that if we're creating more realistic reflective materials. And to get started, rather than the color channel, I'm going to click add, and these are different reflection models. And as kind of a base absorption layer, I'm going to grab this Lambertian, and that's going to be kind of our base color layer. And I can change the color to that same sort of dark blue, and I'll drag that onto my outer main piece so we can see how this is going. Now, we don't have any lights in our scene hitting this, which is going to be a problem if we're trying to create realistic reflective materials and see what happens. So just to be able to see what we're doing, I'm going to grab from this other project this HDR sky image, which we'll go over in the next one where we talk about lighting, and just paste that in here just so we have some lighting around our object. And then in that main material, I want to use this layering system to build up a more unique and interesting reflectance layer. So to get our base reflection going, I'm going to click add, I'm gonna grab this Beckman, and now we'll have a lot more options of how we can build this. So again, there's our chrome ball. So it's reflecting what's in this sky object. And rather than adding a layer mask for Fresnel, I'm gonna go down to layer Fresnel, and now there's all these realistic Fresnel options. If we go to dielectric, and under preset, there's different things like asphalt and emerald and glass. If we wanna mimic the Fresnel effect of real objects, so I'm gonna go to emerald as an option. And there's kind of our base reflection that we had before. But where that gets really interesting is how we can layer additional reflectance layers with different settings, masks, bumps, and all sorts of stuff. So to kind of take this one as a base and add another one and change some settings, I'm just gonna copy and paste it. So click copy and paste. And now I have layer 3. It's basically doing the same thing. But for this one, I'm gonna go to bump strength and under mode, choose custom bump map. And then for custom texture, I'm gonna go to noise. And similar to adding a bump map, we can go in here, and this is gonna be how this layer reflects light differently and then blends together to the other reflectance layer and layer below. So now we have kind of a different layer reflecting light in different ways. And if I go back, we could give that one a little bit of roughness and turn down the overall strength of this. So now we're starting to see what would look like kind of a bump map, but it's just with how it's dealing with reflectance. Now, where this gets really interesting is where we start to add masks and add colors and kind of do some more complex stuff. So again, I'm just gonna copy and paste that layer and put it on top. For the bump strength, I'm gonna go back into that noise and just grab a different one so it doesn't look exactly the same. And you can kind of see where that's adding up some difference. But for this one, I'm gonna give it a color. I'll give it that bright orange color that we'd see in some of the other layers and turn the strength of this one up so we can kind of see what's happening. So it's giving it this additional orange layer of reflectance that we can kind of see dipping through. And if we want to push this even further, we could go to layer mask. And rather than adding a Fresnel, we could use one of these noise materials as the mask for this. So if I go to texture and go to noise and open this up, and then I'll grab one of these other ones like dense. Now if I pull in pretty close here, I'm going to take a look at what this is doing. We can start to see all this additional detail that we're getting just in the Reflectance tab. So I'll go back, and we could also change the blending mode to these. So if I want this one to add, I could check add. You can even make maybe a brighter orange, take the roughness down so we really see those dots in there. And we can keep going and add even more. So let's copy that one and paste it. And we'll change this to kind of like a bright blue maybe. Change that bump map to something else. Let's get something not as contrasty, and then let's change that mask to something else so it doesn't look quite the same. And let's take a look at this from a wide view and kind of see from a distance all this detail that's adding in. So you can see even as it renders, we're getting a lot of variation to detail, and this is kind of on going overboard, but you can kind of see the little details in there, and we could just change the blending modes and the strength of these layers down if we want, and really add a lot of detail, all just in the Reflectance tab. And then if we wanted to use some of the legacy settings, we could do that too. If we wanted more of an actual bump, we could always go back in, add our noise bump, get something a little smaller, maybe turn the strength down, and then we get all that additional detail all in our reflections where it's kind of breaking up the light. So it's pretty interesting. And then again, if we want just slightly different versions of that for each color, we could do our same method of quickly create an orange one, and then under Reflectance, I'll just grab that first diffuse layer, change that to our orange color, put that on an orange object. So that one we might need to tone down a bit. So we could just turn down the strength of a bunch of these and kind of tone that down a bit. And then again, just duplicate that tag to the other orange pieces, put our blue on our null for our main blue piece, and then I'll create a new white one. And same idea for this diffuse layer under Reflectance. I'll just make it close to white and put that on our inner shape. And you can really see the difference of the details that we're getting in here, all just in that Reflectance layer. So there's a lot you can do in Reflectance. It's important to kind of understand the difference between the legacy settings and using Reflectance. You can always use both. They both will get you to the finish line and create some great looking textures and renders. So if you want to keep learning on the basics of Cinema 4D Lite or Cinema 4D, be sure to follow along with the next video where we'll talk about creating and setting up lighting in Cinema 4D, because right now we don't have any, as well as creating alternate ways of lighting objects like this HDR sky to light our reflections, and keep going with this process of getting off the ground in Cinema 4D Lite. And be sure to check out some of my other tutorials on Cinema 4D and Cinema 4D Lite if you want to learn about all sorts of other things you can do, like motion tracking, compositing, animation, and all sorts of stuff. And as always, be sure to subscribe on YouTube at youtube.com/Sean Frangella if you want to get more weekly motion graphics and VFX tutorials, and hit me up on Twitter at twitter.com/Sean Frangella if you got questions, requests for tutorials, and want to talk that way. As always, thanks for watching. I will see you at the next video. Do you like watching these tutorials and want to see more episodes more often? You can help keep the show going by lending your support on Patreon at patreon.com/Sean Frangella. More importantly, if you want to throw in a couple extra bucks, you can get bonus content like project files used in the tutorials, answers to direct questions, live hangouts for questions, and even request specific tutorial topics for me to use for my next video. Also, be sure to subscribe to the show by clicking the subscribe button or visiting the show homepage at youtube.com/Sean Frangella. And if you're hip with social media and have a question about this tutorial, you can find me on Twitter at Sean Frangella. As always, thanks for watching, and I will see you at the next video.